Hey, John, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, hey Brian, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Let's see. So I'm going to date myself right out of the gate and tell you that I've been in sales for about 27 years. I started with the illustrious career of going door to door in office buildings and selling fax machines and presentation systems. My first boss, who's a great guy and had a really interesting and unique voice, dropped a phone book on the desk and said, "JD, here's your leads," and that's how I started. And I survived sales for a year. And after that, after all those lessons in resilience, I actually decided I might make a career out of this thing. And it was a great experience. And I moved from there into really a number of different areas in payroll sales, payroll services sales, into the burgeoning at the time online workforce management space. But right when the internet was developing applications where people could hire on the web. And I've spent the rest of my career now working with large multinational organizations, really focused on the human capital management chain and obviously retaining, maintaining, and attracting all that talent and all the international complications that revolve around that. So it's been a fun run.
So you've always taken the easy route out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's been a cakewalk.
Just luck and timing.
As you know, sales is easy. So, it's always easy, right?
Yeah.
I'm
And
being facetious.
yeah, but what about that space do you like? Because you've had a long run.
I mean, for me, I don't know. My honest answer is I'm not sure I would know what else to do. Some people faint thinking about a commission, trying to make a living through commissions, and I faint thinking about having something other than a variable paycheck. So I think I've always been drawn to the fact that I had a large modicum of control over my own destiny, and I don't know that I would be able to wake up and not look at a sales board and figure out whether I'm going to have a better year this year than next, and how I can control that. So I think it's an amazing profession. I'm really lucky I kind of fell into it, honestly.
And how have they kept you? Because the challenge, the math on staying in sales at the same company doesn't work out well, right? Because you
Yeah.
do well, you get smaller territory, larger quota. You do well,
Yeah.
you get smaller territory, larger quota. So
Yeah.
after 3 or 4 iterations of that, I guess you've had different roles. Is that what's kept you there?
I have. So, for the last, at least 16, 17 years, I've thought every 3 years, I thought, where am I going to go? I'm out of room here to grow. But fortunately, I've been with a company whose culture is hugely focused on making sure that they retain their talent, move them into new roles, and we've just grown like crazy over that time span. So there's always been new challenges, and so it's been a really, especially in this day and age, as you know, a really rare uh, privilege and pleasure to be able to do that and keep learning. And that's the important part. We all have to keep learning and growing, and that's not easy. To your point, at the same company, right?
It's not, because you get comfortable or you get used to, and you
You
have
do.
that success, and it's hard to keep the motor going in the same type of game.
Yeah, and I think the key to that is constantly challenging yourself, not to approach things differently, challenging the organization sometimes to approach things differently. I mean, you've got the value of having these eyes and ears in the space for such a long period of time. To your point, the danger is that you get stagnant and you start to accept the status quo. And I think that's a constant, and that's a life thing too, right? We all
It
have to
is.
continue work to grow. But again, like, the company has been so vibrant with so many new products and services for so long that they've made it much easier than it could be.
And I'm sure you're exposed to a lot of reps over the years, good, bad, and different. Well, what
Sure.
separates the very best from the okay?
You'll probably get a lot of different answers on this, and some will overlap. I think those that, first of all, you got to be genuine. So you have to have a sense of yourself, and I think just like in any profession, you need a strong level of self awareness. So that allows you to operate with inside your box, but also know how to stretch that box. Because if people sense or sniff, and people are smart, if they sense that you're not being who you are and you're not who you are, you're done. And I think the best salespeople, even though their approaches, as you know, vary wildly, and there's all different kinds of successful salespeople, one of the things a lot of them have in common is they know who they are, and to a great extent, they're genuine. Um, and then, depending on the type of sale, as you know, whether it's transactional, long term relationship, I think there's a foundation of really caring about the outcome for the client, having a good sense of humility when you need it, and really putting a long-term strategy and their goals first. And then and it sounds cheesy, but I think everything else works out. It does. And again, I'm speaking from the lens of my profession, which is different than some types of sales. These are very long-term, complex sales. Sometimes the sales process takes years.
But I had this manager once who said, all you have to do is learn to fake authenticity. And I just laughed at him. I go, you realize that's an oxymoron?
Yeah, it kind of is. There's some good actors out there. I just don't know over the long term that that's really sustainable or a great way to live.
Well, that's it, because his authenticness came out eventually, and he was more the traditional talk about sports, relationship, let's go to lunch, dinner, ball game type of guy. Didn't really get into the nitty gritty of the deal or the people or the business.
Yeah,
and he did okay. He wasn't he's my manager. I liked him. He was easy on me because I closed stuff. But what you said about that authenticness, it's kind of a mix of, and you can correct me, confidence, but not cockiness.
right.
You kind of, you do your homework, and you're straight shooter. You don't try and, I guess, portray yourself as somebody that you're not, or put on that sales voice.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah.
And I think, and you talked about, I loved one of the things you discussed, trust versus trustworthy and what that means. And to me, time plus experience has always equaled trust. So it's hard to be trustworthy out of the gate, but what you can do when you meet somebody and you're trying to be authentic is you can set an expectation. And before you even begin to do business, when you're considering it or at the beginning of a sales process, I think it's important to kind of lay down, hey, here's who I am. Who are you? How do you expect to be treated? Here's the way that I generally operate. I'm a super candid guy. And if you ever see that I'm not or believe I'm not, please call me out, because I want to walk hand in hand throughout the entire process with you. I don't want to hold anything back. If there's a weakness or a concern in the model or my value proposition I'm offering, I'm going to point it out to you so you don't have to go look for it. I want you to be able to understand that I may have a counter view as to why in the big picture, that's not a big deal. And in some cases, I may say, we shouldn't pursue this. It's not right for you, even though I might be walking away from the process. Are you okay with that? How does that sound to you? And I think having that kind of dialogue open to start with, like, what do you want to see out of this process? So it's almost like you talk about interviews and interviewing somebody and helping guide them, as opposed to, being back here on it. Like, help, instead of getting caught in the buying process later, responding, can you set the stage together with your client or your prospect and learn how to work through the process with them and gain agreement? To me, those types of conversations, when they're real honest and open, the sooner you can have them, the more you're establishing trust. And then after you do that, you better show up every day and do what you said you were going to do. As soon as you don't, it's over. So, that's a rant, but those are some of the things that come to mind when we get into a conversation like this. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Because I think trust is built by showing more interest in your client than your self-interest.
That's absolutely right. Always.
Because
always.
In business to business and the enterprise sale, there's no trickery. There's no gimmicks, in the long term.
Yeah.
And I think too many people think that selling is just what you say, but it's much more what you do.
It is. It is. And I mean, you can take that and blow it up to, again, like some of the truisms of sales are so universal with everything. And I think those are the kind of things I try to instill in my kids to the extent I have that control as well. But I think it's really important in relationships, period.
And to build trust, it almost forces you to be curious about them, which forces you to put yourself in their position and say, what would they care about? Or is this not a priority? It shouldn't be a priority for them right now.
Absolutely. And if you're not doing that, you're doing yourself a disservice, because that's going to show up later after you've spent an awful lot of time working with somebody you shouldn't be working with on something that they shouldn't be spending time with you on. So, I'm just a huge fan in candid conversations and calling a spade a spade. And if you've if you got issues, call them out, because your client or your prospect's going to figure them out too. So be honest.
And what's the hardest part of your sale?
In my world, I think a lot of folks would tell you, and I tend to agree, it's the political landscape of navigating a large organization. So as you well know, you can put together the best laid plan for yourself and on behalf of your client, and the whole thing could be tracking. And there's 7 different committees that all line up to the C-level. And there's a new report that came out the next month in the financials. We gotta rejigger some things around. So there's so many things you can't control in these types of processes, and that's where I get back to. I think some of the underrated qualities around salespeople. Patience is seen as not to be a virtue often in sales. I want the impatient guy, the guy who's got to win, the guy who's got to close next month. But I really think that there's a time and place for that behavior and a type of sale where that's important. But in the lens with which I view all this, patience is one of those underrated skills that you don't want to be patient in, that you're not taking control of every action item that'll help move your sales process along and help your client get to the finish line and help your company get to the finish line. But my God, in my world, if you're not patient, you're done, because you'll overstep your bounds.
Yep.
You won't hit your goals, and you'll end up doing the wrong thing. We were talking about doing the right thing for the client. If you get too impatient, you'll do the wrong thing for your client or your prospect. So that's important to me too.
Well, that's it, because so much of what you sell in the enterprise is they like it, they want it, they need it, they can afford it, but it still takes a lot more than that. And you don't think like that.
It does. There's that little game that I don't remember the name of it. When you say that, I think of there's a little BB, and this is probably such an old school game, but it's a pegboard, and you're trying to land the little BB in a certain, and that's how it feels sometimes, the adult world of trying to manage a process like this. So many uncontrollables, and you hit speed bumps constantly, and you're readjusting all the time. And I think one of the value components of, we were talking about being in a space for a long time and the challenge of staying crisp. But one of the great things about that is you tend to see, it's almost like Brady on the football field. Terrible analogy, because I don't know about you, but I'm not close to a Tom Brady. But when you're on the field long enough, you can see really, really well, and you see things a mile away. And even when you're mentoring somebody, I think that's important. Like, one of the things that you bring to a mentoring opportunity with another younger salesperson or inexperienced salesperson, one outside the industry, is I almost feel like, what's a good analogy? If you've been driving for a long time, let's say you're in the car with a student driver, they're just responding to stimuli. That's the new salesperson, right? In their turf, in their role, in their industry. But you're watching the lanes, and you know that somebody is about to do something up ahead that's going to cause a major issue, and you can see exactly what's going to happen and how you need to respond to stay out of trouble or to get by those cars. And I think that's some of the value of all this, is we start to understand those processes so much better. We can manage that little ball coming down the chain better. We can keep people out of trouble sometimes. So I think, there's a lot of value in that over time too, with experience.
Well, that's it, because nobody really teaches us the game board of large enterprise sales.
No. And if you could develop a sales training that could somehow take every complex sales industry complexity and do an if and matrix, well, it'd be unbelievable. But the variables are so crazy, right?
Well, that's it, because you either have a treasure map where you understand the little thing with the BB, you can see it, but you can see it in a large deal because you've been through so many. But the new rep is on a treasure hunt. They're going from clue to clue, action to action, reaction. They said this, what do I do now? If then else.
Yep.
And this is what when I first would go into an account, I would get on the whiteboard and I go, okay, first meeting. What do you do in the first meeting? Then what happens? And I draw it out, and then we would get into the training, because I had to understand.
I love that. Yeah.
Where it was, but I wanted them to see the map. Not just because otherwise it's like, okay, Brian, let's say they don't call you back. What do you do then?
Yeah. Right.
Or they tell me it's in procurement, but no one's answering the phone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And these are real issues. When you have 2 accounts or 5 accounts or 10 accounts, that's a real issue. If you've got a zip code with, 10,000 businesses, It's okay if they don't call you back.
Yeah.
You know,
How
very
long did
different worlds.
how long did it take you to get comfortable in these larger deals?
You know, that's a great question. I think I'm I try to be uncomfortable as much as possible. So I'm a believer in being practically paranoid as a sales rep, and sometimes probably too much as a business person too. But I think it's important to really continue to realize that the landscape is always shifting and not be comfortable. So I don't know that I'll ever be entirely comfortable in the context of any situation or deal because I'm always looking at what's going to go wrong. I'm a little bit of a catastrophist, I guess, as it relates to that. But I will tell you that there were a few key deals that I had where I overcame a lot of objections to get to the end game that probably allowed me to build that confidence. I think it's daunting when you first start to go into a boardroom and speak with a multifunctional team of decision makers, many of which know so much more than you do as it relates to their profession. In a lot of ways, especially as you get more experience, you're bringing insight to them that they don't understand because you've got this world of other clients and prospects that you deal with. But that's daunting. So I think getting through the first few of those successfully. I think getting through real obstacles. I remember like my first. This kind of brings me back, and it's also part of kind of thinking about mentorship now that we were talking about that. We'll call him Bork, but one of my first senior managers at my company, when I got my first big deal, and I was a young, kind of a young, real young salesperson in that league or that world, saw me freaking out when we were getting into that, 80% of the way there with the deal. This is a $3 million annual deal, probably over 7 years, 20 million bucks, right? So this is not a small deal for a relatively young salesperson. And how he helped me, and going back to your whiteboard thing, he dragged me into a room. Basically, I felt like a puppy, like by the scruff of my neck, and he pulled me into the room, just him and I. And this is the VP of sales, like going out of his way to come down to my cubicle at the time and see how I was doing. And he proceeded. He knew everything about the deal. I had him involved, and he proceeded to draw an airplane on the board. And he said, "Here's your plane, right? You're cruising. Here's your altitude. You're doing fine. You were here. You were here. You went here. And now I know where you're at." And he started drawing a plane that's on fire, about to crash on the ground. He said, "That's how you feel right now, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's it." And he said, "You're never going to get to the end game and win any significant opportunity until you have this feeling, because you're going to get to a point where the organization, especially if it's a complex engagement and there's some elements of risk on both sides, you're going to get to a point where either your group freaks out or their group freaks out. And if you're not getting there, you're probably not getting a deal done or close to getting a deal done. Something else is wrong." And that to me was an epiphany. And I think as you talk about this, that was one of those moments that gave me more confidence to understand that discomfort, or that, I guess, the amount of turbulence is probably the right word, given what
Oh,
he was putting together. But that was big for me. That was a big moment.
that healthy paranoia is the difference, because
Yes,
if you're blissfully waiting for the purchase order, you're not anticipating or planning or putting in contingencies for
that's right.
that plane fire. And
That's
it
right.
always happens.
It does at different levels. Some are more severe than others. Sometimes it's 15 minutes turbulence, and sometimes you're pretty sure you hit the ground. But you're going to go through that, and that was an awakening for me for sure.
Yeah, especially like with a new account, you might get a renewal or an automatic type thing or an easy deal that'll go through without any friction. But a big new customer that involves
Big.
change in dollars.
That's the word I you took it out of my mouth. Change. When you're
Change.
when you are really injecting organizational change, and it's going to change systemically behavior for people in a company, or potentially mean labor reshifts or reallocations. It's That's a difference. If you're shifting out a piece of software with a few pieces of functionality that work different here, this whistle's blue, this one's green, you don't have to worry about the planes sometimes. But then you're in a commodity game likely too, right?
Well, that's it. And it's not logical, it's emotion. People get scared with change. That's what they get, apprehension. They get second guessing everything. And if you're focused on just ROI and the logical reasons, you're not going to see it.
Oh, I love that because I always have this argument around that. I believe everything comes back to emotion, even after all the practicality, because even that ROI, Brian, it's got to be the ROI. We don't have the ROI. But then there's another question. Well, who's so concerned about that ROI? Well, if that ROI happens or doesn't happen, who's impacted? How does it impact? Oh, they don't get that job. Oh, okay. Wait, it
They're
is
going to
about
look
emotion.
bad.
It's always about emotion.
Yeah.
Always to me. In the end, it's really hard to see, but I believe you.
Well, that's it because I work with reps all the time and it's like it makes sense. They can afford it, they like it. Everything is kind of bought on, but it requires a level of comfort, a level and people like try and stay away from proof of concepts. They say, "Oh, it's a waste of time" or something. But you've got to get that comfort, that change of ownership where they're like, "Yeah, this is going to be good."
Yes.
Not
Yes.
it could be good.
Yeah. Well, especially with what's at stake with a lot of these decisions, the it could be good doesn't work.
It does because right, there'll always be, well, why don't we wait another quarter or let's see what someone else says. And Janie or Joey thinks it's going to be a friction. It won't work with this or that. All these little red herring objections kind of start popping up at the 11th hour.
They do. Yes.
And what's
They
always
do.
the safest thing to do? Nothing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, and this is where going back to again, like I think you mentioned at one point with some content I saw from you talking about the practice introvert and that becomes an extrovert. But I'm such a huge believer that those are some of the best salespeople in the world because they're the curious ones who ask the questions. And a lot of times they're the guy that freaks out a lot of the time I've seen is, and you can teach, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great pitch salespeople. I love when somebody's got their pitch down, but there's some people who have made their living by putting on the show, the razzle dazzle. They
Yeah.
can pitch, they can talk their way out of everything. But if they get to that point, that's their modus operandi. They just want to do that more. That doesn't help. That's where you need to be the investigator and you need to ask a lot of questions. You need to have a broad and wide net or you'll never know why things are getting quiet.
Well,
And so I think those are some of my favorite sales reps that I've worked with are the ones who are great with that, you know?
that's the difference between large deals and small deals. The small deals, you want the infomercial um, Shazam guy, right? Very quickly
Yeah.
showing how before, during, and after, and look how beautiful it is. The problem is in bigger deals, it's not just the product. They believe it works. They like it. Life would be
Yeah.
good with it, but we got to run the gauntlet from here to procurement and issuing it. That's not fun.
Nope. It's a lot of work.
Right. Oh, yeah. Because you know, those purchasing people at the party, they're always the ones up on the table with the lampshades on their head. No, they never go to parties. They're like,
You know,
how can I
just
ruin the party?
I've had, you know, doing this long enough. This is another one where I've learned not to judge a book by its cover. I know there's for each type of functional role there tends to be sort of a stereotype. And I do believe that, trust me, there are a lot of in that profession. There's a lot of professional party ruiners, but I have met some of the best folks that I've gotten to know in those organizations too that have really helped shepherd a win-win, I hate to use it, but deal for both companies as a professional procurement advisor. And I have been dancing on a few tables with some of them. There are some out there, Brian, that believe it or
Well,
not, you can
right.
invite to the party. And you know that. But I mean, some of my best long-term contacts have now been those people that are now those folks that have helped me through those deals, sometimes really kind of put me in a vice over a deal. But in the end, they knew that our organization would perform. And then I was a trusted advisor later. But man, that can be a painful part of the process, no doubt.
Right. And especially if you're kind of either blocked or not introduced or not brought in, because
Yeah.
because guess who's not good with procurement? Everybody else in the company.
Right.
Because you got to, if you understand what they need for their audit and how they are graded and reviewed, they just really want to make sure it's done properly. They don't want to stop it. They just want it done and properly sounds bureaucratic to anybody outside of purchasing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but that's perfect. And that gets back to, and we've had this discussion before too. When I've had a more junior rep say, what do I do with this person? I can't handle them. I can't control them. They're this, they're that. I'm like, well, what did you learn about what makes them successful as it relates to this part of the process for you? So I think that's really, really an important one. And I think it's huge for that part of the organization too, to your point. How do
Yep.
I help you run the most efficient process possible? What do I do for you to make sure that we're ticking off everything that needs to be ticked off? Obviously, I need to make sure that I showcase the value of the solution because it's going to be really important to you and the business team. But can you, when we start our discussion, getting back to that whole thing we talked about at the beginning, building that relationship, can you, what are I'm taking some notes here, but what are the 5 things that you really want to see out of me in this process and that you expect out of all the vendors here? Because I want to make sure I do that for you. I
Right.
mean, it may not win something for you, but you're starting off on the right foot. You're doing some basic blocking and tackling. Yeah,
Right. Because when they start answering, you dig into it and then you find out what's the personal win for them. I
exactly.
was brought in to digitally transform this department, and I've been given 9 months, and I haven't had much success yet. Oh, so you'd
Hmm.
like a quick success?
Oh, and your focus is digital transformation, which is also a big part of what we're doing. Maybe I should really talk
We
to
should,
you about this
yeah.
and how we can help there. I love it. That's it.
Instead of what you do and what's the product do and how is it different than the competition?
Exactly. Yep.
Because most of your clients probably go with you not because of the product, because of the trust and the confidence that you've built into solving their problem.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I like it.
And
As an attorney once told me in the Netherlands, we're in violent agreement, Brian. Violent, violent agreement.
what was another epiphany that you had along the way that really took your game to the next level?
Oh, man. That I should be less afraid to fail as much as I possibly can, not in ridiculous manners where I'm not trying to achieve something, but don't be afraid to fail. And that's another kind of thing I'm trying to pass down as a dad is we have some perfectionism that runs in my family. I'm no stranger to it at times, but really understanding that you're never going to get great unless you fail that 100 times before you do something great. And I'm a big believer in the Malcolm Gladwell, perspective on a lot of things around human behavior, including the 10,000 hours of practice mantra. And whether it's 10,000 hours in a profession or 6,000 or 15,000, there is a magic point where it's not necessarily a math equation for everybody, but where you get over that hurdle, where you unlock some incredible insight as an athlete, as a salesperson, as a husband, as a wife, as a dad. Like, to me, it's that constant effort, and you can't get there without failing and taking risks. And so I think if I was going to tell my younger self, do more of something sooner, it probably would have been that. And the other part of that would probably be the other epiphany is I was better than I knew I was or thought I was. And I didn't have that self-confidence early, which I think is true of a lot of people and a lot of salespeople. But again, you don't develop that until you go through adversity and get hammered by an obstacle and figure out how to work your way past the obstacle next time. So those are the things that really come to mind for me.
I think those are good because so much of sales is counterintuitive.
It
And
is.
if you follow conventional logic, you'll only lose, right?
Yeah,
Because you go, it's about the client, not about me, right? I should
I
be
do.
questioning, not presenting. Yeah.
It's so funny because you're right. And conventional logic, I also think about external perceptions of salespeople and how funny it is that, when my friends talk to me, what they think I do versus what I really do. And we're problem solvers. We're essentially problem solvers. I mean, that's what we're here to do. The person that solves the problem, builds the best relationship, wins. And so I don't think a lot of people really understand that. I certainly didn't understand that until several years into my sales career. I thought I was just somebody who was supposed to go bother somebody.
Right.
And maybe that's the reason I was afraid to fail more, because I wasn't offering value. I was a pest, or I was somebody who was looking after my goals as opposed to somebody else's. So that was another psychological tweak that I had to make over time as well.
That's a good one. Great. Hey, appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
I've been I'm it's been a great much more of my time focusing on my clients and working for my company than promoting myself. I'm on LinkedIn under Jay Douglas. That's, generally from a business perspective where I am. I'll also say that you see the drum in the background. I've had a lifelong obsession with music, and have made several records with a band called 10 Story Relapse. So that's another thing we didn't touch on, but I think it's really important to have another side of who you are and what you do to focus on, to grow that brain on the other side, and get away from, the daily thing every once in a while. So yeah, no, I've really appreciated our time together, Brian, and a real pleasure, and a humble thing to be able to talk to you. So thank you so much for having me.